So Tom, tell me, how did you, where did you go to college?
Where didn't I go to college? Uh, I went to University of Houston first. Then I went to Perkinston College, Southern Mississippi, the University of the Americas in Mexico City. Then where next? And then Texas State. Yeah,
Here, San Marcos.
here. Yeah,
What did you study?
English and theater and education later on. I got my master's in education.
How did you, how did you end up in Hollywood?
I was in a rock band. We had a little studio, and we cut some pretty unusual stuff way back in the 60s, and we took it out to LA and shopped it around. Got some bites. I heard that it lost in the jury by one vote more than once. So we came pretty close, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was where the action was then, Los Angeles. But what we neglected to learn was that there were 3,000 full-time bands in LA at the time. So it was pretty thin goings. We did get a really fine musician as a producer. Paul Horn is one of the greatest flute players in the country. But he wasn't exactly sure what to do with a rock band either. We had a lot of fun. And
Were you a singer?
I was a singer. I was the front man, and I wrote most of the material. But LA was the center of the universe then. It really was. I mean, there was a lot going on then. It wasn't nearly as bad as it is now about some of the negative things. It was a beautiful place.
What was the culture like?
Wide open. You know, there were, at least in our world. We lived in the pool house of some wonderful people named the Rushes. He was a shrink, and she was a pretty well-known artist. And our guitar player's mother was a critic for Variety, so we kind of had a head start on a lot of fledgling groups. But nothing happened. After a few years, we realized that nothing much was happening. In the meantime, I'd been modeling to help ends meet, you know, because it was pretty spare with music. And I was, you know, making $100 an hour for running around on the beach with pretty girls, which was not bad. And then one of the people that I worked with was a guy named Dunstan Pereira. He was from Sri Lanka by way of London. He's a pretty famous guy. And he decided that he wanted to get into film, and he got a backer, had a project, and he had me read for the role and gave it to me. So I wound up at the ends of the earth, really, 11,000 miles away, and kind of left music behind for a while. And it was a beautiful, beautiful place. It's one of the places that's supposed to have been the Garden of Eden, you know? And that's what it looks like. There's beautiful beaches. It's tropical, but there's pretty good sized mountains where it's pine forests and mountain streams. And it was a splendid adventure. It was an ancient culture, very different culture from anything I'd seen. I'd already lived in Mexico then, but it was way different from Mexico.
How different?
It was It was more like living in the mountains with the Yaqui Indians would have been in Mexico instead of being in Mexico City in college. You know, there was something very deep and profound about it just under the surface. And then I met Mike Wilson.
How did that happen?
When I flew in, I got to the airport. I was in line with 4 or 5 people ahead of me going into customs and baggage and all that. And this little guy, Sri Lankan guy, little skinny guy, came up with a sign with my name on it. I said, yeah, that's me. So he grabs me, takes me ahead of all the other people, and stops briefly at the counter for customs, which is somebody that he either knew pretty well or had greased pretty substantially. And they said, go on. And I said, what about my luggage? He said, we'll have it delivered to the headquarters.
Tom, take your hat off, if you would, if that's okay.
Okay. So, so I said, so we're going to headquarters now? He says, no, they're having a party for you. I said, a party? That's a little strange. I said, where? He said, at Mike Wilson's house. I said, who's Mike Wilson? He said, he's a friend of Dunstan's. He's a filmmaker. And he wants to meet you. So we go through this chaotic traffic, amazing traffic. I mean, at that time, that was a long time ago. I don't know what it's like now. But there was every kind of contraption and vehicle on the road that you can imagine. There were rickshaws, ox carts, bicycles, motorcycles, sports cars. And I think I even saw an elephant pulling a bunch of stuff with chains. So we go through all that, and we go to Colombo 5, which is a beautiful area, very substantial houses, to say the least, kind of the River Oaks or Beverly Hills of Colombo. So we go to this big, not exactly palatial, but very large and substantial kind of home. And we go in, and we're in the hall, the vestibule there. And Mike Wilson calls down from the top of the stairs, which are 2 or 3 flights up, and says, come on up. So I went up. He had the kind of voice that you don't ignore. You know. There are all these people around, all partying, drinking gin and tonic and stuff, but I never saw any of them. So I go upstairs, and he opens the door to this little terrace deal on top of one of the sections of the house. Says, you're all right, we had you checked out at the airport. And I never was quite sure what that meant, or who checked me out. And he said, sit down and assume the lotus. Well, I couldn't assume the lotus, you know, I had a little yoga, but not much. So I crossed my legs, sat down. He says, visualize a white dinner plate in front of your face about 2 feet. So I did, and boom, I was somewhere under there.
Do you think he was hypnotizing you?
Later I wondered about it. Later I did, but I don't think he was. I mean, that's what some people said of him, was that he was just a very skilled hypnotist. And I have met people that could do pretty extraordinary things with hypnosis, but this seemed different. So after
So I don't mean to steal you away from that. So you visualize the plate.
It was in huge trees. Like I said, we were on this little terrace deal over a one-story or two-story section of the house with a rail around it. And I was looking up into the trees, and then boom, whatever happened, happened. And later, I went down and met a few people in the garden who were, most of them were getting ready to leave, actually.
Wait, I want to go back. I want where you come up. He says start again with when you sit in the lotus position. I want to really get the details on that. I want to follow that very well.
I'm not sure I can give you many details because whatever he did and however he did it, he kind of took me to a different level of reality,
What were you seeing things? What were you seeing? What was
I don't remember. I really don't. I mean, maybe that would argue for the hypnosis theory, but I don't know. I think I was learning something that I was supposed to know. And now later on, I did have sessions with him where it was pretty explicit what I was supposed to be learning. But most of the time with Mike, when I knew him, and I lived there for a while, I lived at his house with him and Liz. They were wonderful, wonderful people. Brilliant people. Most of the time, I didn't know what the hell I was doing there. And he wouldn't tell me much about it. He always acted like I was supposed to know what was going on. But I actually didn't, at least on one level. And there were these people. He lived up in this big bedroom by himself. Never saw him in anything but a sarong. And barefoot. He was a lean, muscular guy, a Brit, pronounced accent. Very, very smart guy. Obviously smart. And I pestered him for a long time about what are we doing here? Because he would have people come from the strangest places all over the world. And I mean, everything from ambassadors to rock stars to Buddhist priests. Never explained a thing to me. They'd come and they'd sit with him for 2 or 3 hours. And then they'd leave, and I think a lot of them just got back on a plane and went back where they were from. So this got me curious, of course, and he just said, don't get into that. And then one day he said, all right, sit down. So he had this huge bed, it's like I have now, but I didn't remember any at that time, that size. He said, assume the lotus, right? I still couldn't assume the lotus. So he said, just close your eyes. So I closed my eyes. And he said, just follow the green arrows. So all of a sudden, like that, it was like I was in deep space. Like there were all these celestial bodies around me and infinite darkness. And sure enough, this line of green arrows appeared in this arc that seemed to go across the universe. He said, concentrate on the arrows. So I did, and all of a sudden, I was sitting in this guy's office or library or something. And it was in Chile. And this guy was Dr. somebody. I'm not sure if it was if he was a medical doctor or a PhD in something, but I think he was a medical doctor. That's the impression I got. He had this beautiful old room, this library, with lots of books and rich leather and fire going in the fireplace. And he said, I know this is a little alarming and scary if you're not used to it, but it's all perfectly natural. You'll get used to it. And I said, what are you? What are you doing? And he says, well, we're just some people that know the world is in crisis, and we do what we can to assist in that and to keep the world from being overcome. I don't remember much of our conversation. He was very polite, but a little distant. And I have no way of validating that, knowing if it was real or hallucination or dream or what. But somehow, when I came out of it, whatever it was, I never asked Mike what it was about again. And I never doubted that it was about something. That was it.
Can you talk about any other encounters, learning experiences with him or his?
Oh yeah, I can. Most people are not going to believe him or find some more rational explanation for him. And I'm not opposed to that. I mean, maybe so. I came in to see him one day. He was sitting on that big bed, lotus position. And he said, Thomas, would you help me? And I said, sure. What? You want me to carry the wastebasket down or what? He says, okay, sit with me. So I sat with him. I'll get done a lot of times. And he said, just be still. And I was sitting there across from him, no farther than I am from you right now. Do you remember Star Wars? Not Star Wars, Star Trek?
Yes.
Remember Beam Me Up, Scotty?
Mm-hmm.
I was watching him, and his body dissolved like that, like into electronic particles. And then I was staring at the wall, and I was just flabbergasted, sitting there with my mouth open. And in a few minutes, it all materialized, and he was back. He said, thank you, Thomas. That was the only response I ever got.
Do you have any intuitions about that?
It was an energy thing. I was apparently assisting, I don't know how I could assist a guy like that with energy, but apparently he thought I had some. I don't know where he was going, what he was doing, if he went anywhere, I really don't know much about this stuff. I mean, I was young then. I had a lot less experience than I've had now, a lot less training than I've had. But it changed me in some way that I can't really explain or identify.
Did he ever talk about any philosophy or tradition to put in some context of our shared history?
Never, except he was for all of them. He respected Hindus. His guru was a Hindu, and that was a lot of what he did. But he also knew lots of Buddhists and lots of Christians. I mean, I saw the Archbishop there more than once. There's a lot of people in Sri Lanka who are actually Christian. And he was no exception. He'd come to see Mike talk for a long time. It was kind of a learning experience just being around there. But most of it is hard to put into words, you know. I think I became a better person somehow. And Mike was up to something. And I guess maybe all these other people that came to see him were up to something too. But I was never quite privy to any like council meetings or planning sessions, or except he would occasionally make a comment like, "Oh hell, the Suez is going again," something like that. And then somebody would show up within a day or two. I don't know if they did anything about it, could do anything about it. But the world's still here.
Yeah, we have averted a lot of disasters.
Yeah, we have. We're in the midst of one right now.
Yeah, the culture seems to be, American culture seems to be ripping itself apart.
Yeah, it does. But, you know, when all these terrible things started happening, he would never get flustered. It didn't seem like. He was like, oh, there we go, you know. He was a really different kind of person. I mean, he wasn't Zen, but I can use that word to describe him. You know, he's very peaceful, very vital at the same time. High energy.
Pardon me.
And it was never like this was just esoteric studies or anything. He was about something, you know, he was always into something. Wish he was here now. He could give you some answers.
Can you talk about his filmmaking?
Yeah, he started off, he got to Sri Lanka by way of movies. He was partner with Arthur C. Clarke, and they were making underwater films. He was a diver. And they did pretty well with him, I think. And then he and Arthur had a falling out, and he got into the Bollywood kind of movies. He had the crew, he had the equipment, and there was an endless demand for it in that part of the world. I think he made a good living. But before that, he was in on some pretty big film deals.
Hollywood deals?
Yeah, like Space Odyssey, 2001. You know, Arthur wrote that novel, if it is a novel, and Mike advised him on it. And they originally, I believe, went to Satyajit Ray, who was a very, very, very famous Indian filmmaker, really a master, who had won a bunch of awards at Cannes and all these places. And using his names, they got other people involved in it. And as far as I know, I'm not sure where Kubrick got into it, but it was probably the studio that demanded a better known director or something.
American.
Yeah. So he was a filmmaker, but that wasn't his main occupation.
I read something on the internet about him researching something called a lingam, like some kind of male. Have you heard that?
Yeah, well, I'm not.
He recovered it in some diving.
Yes, he did in Trincomalee.
It was some. It was some archaeological artifact of Hindu culture that he found.
Yeah, it's an artifact that represents the male energy, and he had it. I think he still had it. And he also, from that same site in Trincomalee, there's a place where there was a beautiful temple that was built on the top of this mountain over the sea. That was apparently a gorgeous place and an ancient place. And when the Portuguese came in, they were ruthlessly Christian, of course, and they somehow pushed it all over the cliff into the sea.
So this artifact was part of a Hindu temple?
Yeah, it was in the temple somewhere. At least he found it now. He was scooting around with scuba equipment. So I don't know where it was, but he found it and brought it up. And interestingly enough, he had this smooth stone that he got there at the same time, and he brought it up and he told me, he said, "This is for your brother." And he didn't know Jim, but Jim was a very spiritual person. And I gave it to him, and he had it for many years till he died. Yeah, you can actually see that temple still. And it was a strange time. It was right at the end of the first Civil War. And there was still a lot of uneasiness and stuff going on. And Trincomalee was just this very foreign, isolated, beautiful, wild place. And Mike knew it well.
How did he die?
I don't know. I do know that Kataragama is a little place in eastern Sri Lanka. And during most of the year, it's 400 people there. But there's a festival that goes on in August. I believe it's August. And people come from all over the East because this guy Kataragama is a very romantic figure. And he's in this love affair with this earth spirit, which kind of symbolizes the union of physical and spiritual. And Weligama, I think. What's her name? Probably have that wrong, but anyway, they have this huge festival, and for that week, there's 500,000 people there. It's kind of a jump, you know. And it's supposed to be a very spiritual place. I mean, it's a different kind of spiritual if you're there during the festival, because you have parades with elephants who are covered with electric Christmas tree lights, and hundreds of thousands of people, and you know, maybe 100,000 at a time are chanting something like "Veil, veil, vedi, veil," and the gods do their courtship thing, and they take him on the elephants over to her temple, and he courts her, for 4 or 5 nights, whatever it is. And then on the last night, he stays and spends the night, and everybody freaks out. So it's an extraordinary experience to be there. It really is. Well, Mike wound up living there, and he became a sadhu, just a holy man. And he died there. And I don't know what happened with Liz and the children or any of that. I keep telling myself I'm going to follow up and find out how and where they are. It was a different world, completely, in so many ways.